Hello, everyone. This is A Bit of Business. My name is John FitzGerald, and on behalf of LearMedia.tv and the British and Irish Trading Alliance, welcome to the show. Brexit, the construction sector, trade impacts, border controls, movement of people and goods. Hardly a day goes by without these being mentioned in the news one way or another. Why? Well, it's relevant to all of us, especially to anyone working in the construction sector across Ireland and the UK. In this post-Brexit landscape, building matters with large parts of both economies dependent on a thriving construction industry. So what are the impacts? And how do we move forward in this brave new world? Our three special guests today are Chris Phillips, Sean Carraghey, and Daniel Crosby. They can all help us dig into this topic in a bit more detail. Chris Phillips has over 5 decades of real estate management and fund management and corporate finance experience. Between 2010 and 2021, Chris served as chairman of Places for People, one of the UK's largest property management, development, regeneration, and leisure companies. In this role, he oversaw gross assets of £4.9 billion and over 11,000 employees. He is currently chairman of Londonnewcastle Market Asset Management and the Shetland Space Centre. Chris is also chairman of Soho, a £0.5 billion real estate investment trust on the main London Stock Exchange. He is also a seed investor in a number of small to medium-sized enterprises. Sean Carraghey is the operations director at PJ Hegarty in Ireland. He is a chartered engineer and a fellow of Engineers Ireland. He joined PJ Hegarty and Sons as a site engineer over 40 years ago and has progressed through the ranks ever since. He was appointed a regional director in 1996 and a main board director in 2005. In his current position, he has overall responsibility for the running of the company in the UK and the south and west of Ireland, and he has extensive experience in large civil engineering and building projects of all types, being involved in some major joint ventures with international companies. Daniel Crosby is a partner at the law firm King and Spalding in Geneva and specializes in international trade law matters. He supports sovereign and business clients to achieve their commercial objectives around the world by applying and negotiating international agreements. He represents major US, European, and multinational corporations in a variety of trade and investment negotiations and on the application of treaty-based rules to improve global market access for goods, services, and e-commerce. Daniel is also fluent in English, Russian, Hungarian, and French, and enjoys teaching, speaking, and writing on international trade and investment issues. So that's it, folks. Please do remember to visit the BITA website, BITA.ie, for the latest member news and updates on BITA initiatives, including the Be Plastic Aware initiative, which is focused on reducing the amount of plastic used across the construction sectors in the UK and Ireland. Chris, Sean, and Daniel coming up next. Please do stay tuned. We are off. Gentlemen, this is A Bit of Business. Welcome to the show.
Morning, everybody.
We are indeed fortunate to have three very experienced individuals on our panel to tackle our topic today of building matters. Chris, you bring many years of UK construction sector experience to the table. Sean, you do the same with a particular focus on the market in Ireland. Daniel, You are Switzerland in this discussion to an extent, and normally based there as it happens, and you have a helicopter view of all things trade related. So let's start there, gentlemen. Brexit, free trade, movement of goods, commercial impacts, COVID-19, a veritable perfect storm of events all happening around us now. And if I could start with you, Chris, if you go back 12 months, what was your biggest concern about Brexit, and has that concern materialized today?
Well, I think my biggest concern, John, was actually the supply chain and the pricing of the supply chain and the availability of the supply chain because of the duties and the paperwork, etc. Has that materialized? And I also, to be honest with you, had real concerns about the Southern Irish problem. Big concerns about that. But I suppose if I go back a year, those were the major issues. But of course, the COVID epidemic has masked a lot of that effectively. And so I think those are the biggest worries. Have they materialized? I think it's actually too early to say, to be honest with you, because a lot of this hasn't settled down yet, either in the way that the UK government is going to work, its trade agreements. We always knew it would take a lot longer, but I think those are my major concerns. And they are ongoing concerns, I would say.
Sean, would you echo that?
Yeah, I think exactly as Chris said. I mean, it's, we you know, at this time, 12 months ago, we were worried about what type of a Brexit deal. Was it going to be a deal or a no deal? And there was a lot of uncertainty and concerns. From the Irish economy point of view, obviously, you know, we do so much business with the UK, and there was a real concern that, you know, the cost of exporting goods to the UK was going to severely impact. But I don't think that's materialized at the moment because of COVID. We really don't, you know, there are a lot of issues which maybe we'll talk about in a minute when it comes to COVID. There are a lot of issues, but I think they're more COVID issues. The only real thing that I'm hearing from talking to, you know, our team here is there's a lot of paperwork now, to, you know, with customs clearance and that. But while there are a lot of cost increases, I think they're mainly to do with COVID, but we haven't really seen any impact as yet.
And
we get over, obviously we get over the paperwork. It's a lot, it's a whole load of new procedures, and we have to employ customs clearance people. And, you know, obviously you could do without it. It makes everything a bit harder, but I think we'll all get used to it, and we'll settle down, and I think it'll be, you know, it'll soon be forgotten about.
And Daniel, you've been involved in international trade agreements for years. In your experience, and back to Chris's point, how long do you think it will take for the dust to settle post-Brexit and essentially get back to some new normal, if you like?
So I agree that really the main issue that we need to get over is COVID. And for those who were sitting in their seats a year ago wondering where we were going to be, or I guess more than a year ago now, to get beyond COVID. But really, it's from the trade perspective, it's the tariff issue that's been clarified. You know, before we had our agreement with the UK, with the and the EU, we weren't sure last year whether there was going to be tariffs applied. So all your construction materials would have been, you know, hit by a tariff. Some were at 0, but most were between 2 and 3 and 6 and more percent. So at least that issue has been clarified, and so that's going forward is not going to change, and that's an uncertainty that's been taken off the table. So we're all pretty happy about that going forward.
And Chris, a couple of the issues you mentioned.
Just to come back on that a minute,
Sure.
John, you asked me, the other thing I'm concerned about is how the EU and the UK are going to implement that trade agreement. I think there are grave political concerns, and we've seen that already with the fishing and Jersey and us sending a gunboat. You know, unfortunately, I'm old enough to have been in business before we joined the EU. So ancient monuments like me are going back to those days, but I'm not lending my expertise on the paperwork. You know, I was in the city then, and I'm not lending any expertise on paperwork. I thought that was gone forever. But that is a big concern, the way they're implemented, because in the UK, I can't obviously speak for Sean and his government, but in the UK, we live in a sort of soundbite government that makes instant sound bites and gestures, but this is all down to minutiae and detail, which isn't this government's strong suit.
Daniel, are there precedents elsewhere for how these sorts of things play out, and importantly, how long they take to play out?
Unfortunately, no. And I totally take Chris's point that it really will depend on implementation. That if the countries are getting along well, then they can follow the rules that they were always following. The only addition is customs procedures, which should be a one-off. You have to hire people for compliance and dealing with the administration going forward. But really, if one side or the other is unhappy politically with the other, you can make procedures very difficult, or they can be very easy. So those are things that aren't just legal or practical. It's the politics of the day will affect how fast your products can get across the border.
Sean, do you get the sense that it's a similar situation in Ireland, governing by soundbite, or do you think that there's a more considered approach within the Irish government to sort of make this work as quickly as possible?
Oh yeah, I mean, clearly everybody wants to make it work. Look, as I say, COVID has taken over everything, and that's where the focus. You don't hear Brexit being discussed. The implications of Brexit being discussed at the moment, and I'm sure there are issues, but I think it's in everybody's everybody's interest to get things resolved. And I'm sure if issues do come up, we thought we'd never get a Brexit deal, and obviously common sense prevailed at the 11th hour. And I'm sure if there's issues arise again, that they'll get resolved.
Does that happen elsewhere, Daniel? Does common sense usually prevail at the 11th hour in these negotiations, in these types of negotiations?
Yes, thankfully, but only because you have a case here. So much economic interdependence and so much good that comes out of the trade that there's usually a way to, and the trade agreements themselves provide mechanisms and ways to force the parties to go to their committees where the bureaucrats talk and decompress and take the political heat off, and you can bring it to Geneva, to the World Trade Organization now, because you have both independent members, so you're not just UK versus EU. It's brings it into the rest of the world where your other trading partners are watching you play, and it's more of the impression you're making on the outside world as well. So there are lots of ways to get it back on the rails. That's a very good thing about the trade agreements.
Well, that's encouraging to hear, I think, for everybody. And Sean, two issues I sense are emerging now in terms of impacts, and Chris touched on one of them. One is the supply chain and the supply of materials, and the second is the whole issue of a labor force and ease of movement and ability to come from Eastern Europe into the UK, certainly still into Ireland. Are you seeing any impacts yet here in Ireland in relation to both of those at the operational level within PJ Hegarty?
Yeah, I mean, look, just to take the material issue first, I mean, it is chaotic at the moment. There are huge increases across the board. Now, some maybe, I think COVID is clearly an issue, that there was probably some of the industries were shut down, so production was halted. And now things are up and running again. There's obviously protocols around factories, COVID protocols, which may be increasing costs. But obviously then you've got all the, you know, like the States and Ireland and the UK, there is a big focus on infrastructure spend. So there's huge demand, people starting up again and trying to catch up. And as a result, trying to get materials is a big issue, and there have been big increases. It's also coupled with, I don't know if you recall, back in I think in the States, there was a big lockdown and oil production ceased in Texas there for a while. So oil related products have gone through the roof. Steel, which is always, the price of steel is always, you know, it goes up and down like a yo-yo, but I've never seen increases like it. And for example, you can't get structural steel, you know, you know, we're doing a lot of work for Jemison, Pernod Ricard here in Cork, and have done so for many, many years. And we're having to order steel now that we need for October, November, and we have to order it in the next day or two. So the cost has gone through the roof. The cost of materials has gone through the roof. Even things like timber, and you know, it's all mixed in together. Ireland is an exporter of timber, but there's been an awful lot of appeals lodged with the Irish government, with Quilter, regarding felling of trees, and because of COVID, maybe people weren't working, and there's been a big backlog, so much so that we can't get timber either, you know. So across the board, there's big increases in material prices, and there's big issues with supply. I honestly believe it's a short-term issue, you know. There's no other reason to explain it, you know. I think it'll take a number of months, but we'll get back to where we were. As regards labour, you know, John, or you know, pre-COVID, I go back to February of last year, you know, the construction industry had rebounded hugely in Ireland. We couldn't get people, staff or labour. We were really struggling. Then COVID came, and you know, we managed okay last year, but you know, an awful lot of the labour in the construction industry in Ireland comes from Europe, and a lot of them went home for Christmas. And then the lockdown came in Ireland first week of January, and we were probably the only construction company, to my knowledge, in the world that shut down. So a lot of the labour force didn't come back. You know, they were able to get their work back home, and it was probably cheaper to be back home, and they were closer to the families and all that. So while the lockdown this year was only a partial lockdown, you know, we're only fully back here in Ireland since after the May Bank holiday weekend. So it is hard to know yet, but I definitely think labour is going to be a big issue. It was going to be an issue even without COVID. I think it's going to be a big issue because there is a big spender. You know, the outlook is good for the construction sector in Ireland, so it's a major concern.
And Chris, would you echo that from a UK perspective, especially now that the UK is outside of Europe and that labour issue is far, far greater?
Well, I think the labour issue in the UK is even more difficult because we don't have the freedom of movement, and we're bringing in immigration laws at the same time. And you notice the government have changed the right to remain situation in the UK for EU citizens. If you think about it, the construction industry and the health service are hugely dependent on overseas nationals. Not necessarily just from the EU in terms of the health service, but in terms of the construction industry, definitely. And, you know, a lot of the Polish labour force have been here for a long time. They've made their money. They've sent their money back to Poland. They've made investments. They've done well. And they will repatriate because Poland is growing in the EU, and Poland is taking advantage of its geographical location. I mean, Poland is looking to build 3 major ports. And so Polish labour wage differentials have narrowed. Now, for the UK will also pay the price for not actually encouraging people to join the construction industry. They'd rather make videos or music in their rooms than get up at 6 o'clock in the morning in the pouring rain on a freezing site in the middle of nowhere. And who can blame them? You know, we've grown, everyone wants to be an artist or a footballer. Very few people, when you go into a school, say, oh, I'd like to be a construction worker. it is a big issue, and the other big issue in the UK, and I don't think you can underrate this globally, is to encourage the female workforce in the construction industry and in all areas, not just architects and the sort of what you might call, Sean might call the sort of white collar area, but across the trades. And there is no reason in this day and age why that can't be done. If 50% of the population are women, you know, the construction industry is probably, and I'm just saying this off the top of my head, 5%. And I think we in property and construction have to do a lot more to get the kids when they're 14, 15, interested and show that this is an interesting job, because at the end of the day, a construction worker can drive his wife and kids back past something and say, I helped build that.
Yeah,
Sean,
exactly. Chris,
that-
I think just to pick up on that point, I mean, you know, we had the crash came in 2008, and you know, unfortunately, the construction sector got badly hit in Ireland, and as a result, we weren't bringing on the trades, and I mean kind of the wet trades like masons and plasters. The electrical and the mechanical side not as bad, because to be fair to the electrical and mechanical contractors in Ireland, they self-perform a lot of their own work, so they did bring on a lot of apprentices. There may be a shortfall, but nothing like in the main sector, and it's a big challenge. And the industry here in Ireland, you know, we're going around here, the construction industry, going around to the schools, trying to encourage kids to think about a career in construction, you know. And as Chris said, unfortunately, I don't mean this to sound the wrong way, but in certain areas you go into schools and it's all people, everybody is being pushed to go to university. You know, I'd say in a lot of schools, you know, the number of people in Ireland that go to third level are well over 90%, when in my day it was probably 10 or 15%, you know. So, you know, trades aren't the most attractive, but yet, I mean, a good tradesperson now can earn an awful lot of money. And, you know, I think it's going to be an issue. I think, you know, it's going to drive costs. It's going to be a shortage of labour. So, you know, we're seeing it already here in Ireland. You know, we're seeing the costs of labour going up in the UK, you know. I mean, as regards women, we continue to try and get women, you know, into our business. And I would have I think, you know, they're a great asset to the business. But I suppose the nature of the work, it's probably, you know, more office related. You know, we've employed some young engineers, female engineers out on site and out on the ground, and you know, they didn't stick the pace. We have one or two still with us, but others make up different areas, like in quantity surveying and safety, and obviously we have a lot of people in admin. But it is a challenge, and we are conscious of trying to get more women into the business, into the industry.
Daniel, do you have any thoughts or reflections on this, especially around the movement of people around the European Union?
I certainly do, because you know, my own travel has been made more difficult. But the movement of labor, you know, is what it is. You know, there's no freedom of movement, which means construction workers can't move. The interesting thing is in the aspect of trade and services. You know, we've been talking a lot about trading goods, but when you do mention architecture or real estate or finance or other kind of areas of services, including construction services themselves, trade agreements do provide a right to move between countries to perform those services on the short term. But I know there's a huge industry of not only finance, but of construction services, engineering services, and real estate and services among the countries of Europe and the UK. So there is some freedom to move, and with the digital technologies, there's what's called a cross-border movement as well, which is non-physical movement, where all the Zoom stuff that we're become used to doing is actually provided for in trade agreements. So you don't have to move physically to supply an architectural or real estate service, but you have the right to do so under the existing trade agreements, both between the UK and the EU and at the WTO.
And let me just switch gears here a little bit, gentlemen, and just read a quote from an article that I read from Northumbria University just quite recently. And the quote is, before the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown, statistics showed construction was one of the least productive, most wasteful, and least sustainable industries. Numerous industry reports highlighted decades of poor procurement, lack of innovation, lack of investment in skills across the supply chain, and much more has led to inefficient working practices. So in the context of that, do you think COVID-19 has been a bit of a wake-up call for the construction sector, not only in Ireland and the UK, but globally, to get its house in order, modernize its practices, and start to improve its reputation around sustainability, etc.? Chris, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing, John, has been the environmental movement. That has been a massive change, which COVID hasn't really played a part in, but it's made people much more aware of, I think. And I think environmental compliance, both here and globally, you know, because I'm involved, as you know, in companies in other jurisdictions outside the EU, environmental concerns, particularly amongst the young, have driven a lot of changes and will drive legislation quite hard. And that will be, and it should lead to better practices in the construction industry, because I don't know, you've read a quote from that article. Did they go on to say that construction is the least digitalised of industries in the UK? The only one that's less digitalised is agriculture. And one of the things, just going back circularly to your point about compliance and all that sort of thing, there are huge opportunities for digitalisation in construction that haven't been taken, which have been taken in a lot of other industries.
And Chris, just on that point, and I mean, one of the things that we're very focused on in the BITA Global Forum is the whole issue of plastic pollution within the construction sector. And there's a couple of things, I guess, that can happen to start to address that and change working practices. Companies can take up the issue themselves and drive change within the organizations to do things differently. So that's in the private sector. And then on the public side, I suppose you have the government that have a couple of levers to pull, whether it's taxation or regulation. And what's the answer to the sustainability question? Is it a mix of public pressure and private sector initiatives? Is it going to be driven by the private sector? Do you think that the government is just going to use the stick of regulation and taxation to make the change happen? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are it's a combination of both, John, and actually setting standards. There are lots of different standards around, and it's actually coordinating those standards. And, you know, most of all, it's actually enforcing them, spending the money so that the regulator has the staff and the ability to ensure compliance. I've recently advised a company that's quite a big player in the offsite, in the waste business. They've just developed a business where they take the spoil and create wetlands and, you know, mini copses and forests. Now, that is a private sector initiative, but they will always struggle against those that do that, take the waste off the site and tip it somewhere else, because the government doesn't enforce properly. And why doesn't it enforce? Because it hasn't put the resource into compliance. So passing legislation is fine. Enforcing it in this sector is another matter. One of the reasons you have all the problems with fire and all that is that they've never invested for 25 years in the building inspectorate. The local authorities don't have the money to inspect to the level they should do. You know, and I'm sure if you had a local authority person on here, they'd say, oh yeah, we ensure that it's nonsense. They haven't got enough money in the sector and they can't enforce it. And so it's a combination, John, of moral turpitude and government legislation.
Sean, would you agree with that?
Would you? I suppose there was a lot of points raised there. I mean, I suppose look on the environmental. Certainly I think COVID, we've all become, we've all had to stay local and are outdoors an awful lot more than we used to be before. And I think there's, we are certainly very more aware environmentally here in Ireland. I mean, obviously we're all aware of, electric cars now, and by 2030 that we won't have any diesel or petrol cars. But even just here in Ireland now, greenways and cycleways, they're just after popping up all over. And I'd say if you come to Ireland in 10 years' time, there'll probably be a greenway at the full perimeter of Ireland. So we are very much more environmentally aware. The digitalization, and I'm old school, so I wasn't reared like our kids in that age, but it's certainly becoming a big thing in the industry. And again, talking to our lads on the sites, and to see when you're looking at jobs, you're trying to understand them, to see them in a digitized form, it is very useful, and it is the way of the future. It's coming. It's a very useful tool. Regarding innovation, the sector, like is to be fair, it's been there a while that we're not the most innovative sector, but I think we're getting there, and even supply of labour is becoming more an issue. So we would, as much as possible, try and look at off-site construction and make, construction sites are very difficult to manage from a safety point of view and a logistical point of view at the best of times. So the more and more you can do off-site, it makes the site more efficient, it makes the site safer, it makes things more certain, So, I think it is going that way. In the end of the day, you still need to, build things on site, but as much as you can do off site, I think it's the way forward.
And Daniel, do you see the green agenda or the green economy starting to become part of trade discussions and trade agreements? And do you think that is happening quickly enough to drive some of the change that we're talking about? What are your thoughts?
So yeah, John, that's a really big deal, and I think if anything is on the minds, on the radar of everyone listening and thinking about these issues, really the environmental trade agenda has not been a trade issue since I've been practicing, since the mid-90s, and now we have this year we have a new committee formed to address environmental issues in a structural way on the worldwide level at the World Trade Organization. You have, the Conference of the Parties, COP25, coming up later this year in Scotland, and the rule, the impact is going to be that there's going to be a tax in addition to customs duties that we're all talking about here that we've avoided. Now there's going to be a tax at the border when you import from any outside source based on the environmental impact, the greenhouse gases, the carbon embedded or emitted when that product is made. So there's going to be, as Chris said, it's all about coordinating standards. And if one country has one standard for how much carbon was emitted and the other country says no, it's actually X or minus, then you're going to have all kinds of issues. But when you say fast, it's moving very fast. The EU is introducing its draft this June. Next month, and then by next year it should be enforced. So it's really moving fast, and it's something that business hasn't weighed in on as much at the EU level, but then immediately it's going to be international. So anything you source from Asia or South America or the EU to the UK is going to be considered for environmental impact.
Chris, the back to the green agenda and the green economy, and you mentioned young people. Are you, when you look across the sector in the UK and some of the companies that you're involved with, do you see pressure from the consumer, the actual end user, the person who buys the product produced by the construction sector? Do you see the pressure there building for a greener product, a more sustainable product? Or is that something that will be driven by the companies and then the consumers will receive it?
Well, no, I think what I see, John, and I'll give you personal experience of a development, that we did a state-of-the-art green development where the cost was, and this isn't the exact difference in cost, was 10% higher. And we marketed that as a green development, and it was a higher price. And of course, a lot of people paid lip service to their desire for it. But when it came to the pocketbook, to use an American expression, they weren't so keen. And so they went round the corner to what you might call a conventional one. So we ended up, and this was a residential development in central London, we ended up selling it all to the Dutch and the German expats who were willing to pay for it. The Chinese, etc., would go around the corner and buy something that was cheaper, not necessarily the same quality, of course. But so I think the consumer will drive it, but the consumer has to be aware of the cost of it and the cost to them of it and what it actually means in pricing. I think that's a very fine balance between the producer of a product and the purchaser of a product and how much they're willing to pay as a premium, not an inflated profit premium, but just a real premium to get the optimum green product. It's very interesting that now you see a lot of green bonds being issued in the market. They all have variable systems of evaluation. The investors all have their own systems of evaluation. So this whole green pricing, green finance, I think will be important. And that'll be something the government can play a role in, not just in taxation, but in grants to sustain it and generate it as well.
Sean, from an Irish perspective, same question. Are consumers demanding a greener product now? Or is it a similar situation that, yes, it all sounds great, but I'm not willing to pay for it?
Yeah, I think they are, but yeah, as Chris says, it's what hits the pocket. You know, I mean, you know, there is definitely a big shift now towards electric cars, but just at the moment, they are very expensive. It will come as the price comes down. But you mentioned the young people, and I'd be on my youngest now. I have 4 kids. My youngest is 21, and the one thing I saw during COVID is the postman or the delivery man, DHL, were knocking on the door every second day with deliveries, and it was driving me mad. You know, everybody buying things online, so they're buying an awful lot of things online. You know, so they're going for the cheaper option. You know, to be fair, they are very conscious, but they all have limited money. You know, and I think there is definitely, we are all more environmentally aware. You know, here in Ireland we have the Green Party in government, and they are driving it big time. And you know, I do think people are seeing it. You know, we have a very green country here in Ireland, and I think people are seeing the benefits and are buying into it. And I think we have to continue to educate our kids in school to be more environmentally aware.
And gentlemen, I'm conscious of our time, and I've 2 more questions for you. And the last question, and maybe you can think about that as we answer the first question, is I'm interested in your boldest prediction for the future of the construction sector in this post-Brexit world. But before we answer that question, maybe I'll go to you first, Chris. And we talked about technology uptake in the sector and the I guess the way I would see it, glass half full, a massive opportunity for technology uptake across the sector in Ireland and the UK and further afield. If you were to pick one technology or one technology platform that you could point to say this can really make a difference moving forward to the way the industry works and is successful or not, what would you point to?
Yeah, you've asked me quite a loaded question there because I've invested personally in some of these. So
well, give me maybe 3 or 4.
And then be sort of hammered by any entrepreneur who might watch this, who I put money into. I think the primary one, the one I would see, is the actual compliance area and BIM and the global standards for compliance in the construction industry. You know, people like FitzGerald have the ability to create a platform that gives you plug and play, which I believe is what the youngsters call putting apps onto a platform with multi-uses.
Sean, same question to you. If you were to pick one or a couple of technologies or new ways of doing things, what would you focus on, or what would your choice be?
Look, I think as much work that you can do off-site, you know, better. It just, as I said to there earlier, sites are difficult to manage. The environment is constantly changing. A lot of people, a lot of materials, a lot of plant. So I think as much as possible that can be done off-site. You know, Chris mentioned BIM again, and you know, that has a huge part to play in it. So I think that's, you know, we should be trying to do that more, excuse me, more and more.
Daniel, any thoughts? If you were to pick one technology or one advance in the sector, what do you think it would be in the future to make the biggest difference?
Yeah, so I think it's going to actually be changes in construction materials that we're going to make, not only to be green, but to be strong and lasting. We're going to have, you know, composite woods that are stronger than steel, cheaper and more environmentally friendly, and that those materials are going to be built on a 3D basis, where there's going to be some kind of input material that is just sort of made on site. that's a lot of what we see in especially foundations and walls, and the basics are just going to be printed on site from environmentally friendly materials.
I think that the old industrial model or way of doing things is literally that, old and industrial. Modern methods of construction is a huge potential for the industry. And back to our point about encouraging young people to come into the sector, when you provide a nice working environment in optimal operating conditions, creating something that's new, funky, sharp edge, bespoke, that potentially could become a much more attractive career choice for young school leavers instead of going to university, because there's a clear career path and there would be plenty of opportunities to leverage technology in that type of a built environment off site. So gentlemen, my last question, which I mentioned a minute ago, your boldest prediction for the future of the construction sector in the post-Brexit landscape. Sean, perhaps I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I'm really excited for the construction sector in Ireland. You know, pre-COVID, it was, you know, things were absolutely flying. You know, okay, COVID is a hiccup, and please God, we will get over it. But there's huge plans for Ireland. You know, they're trying to get everything away from Dublin. The National Development Plan, National Framework Plan, the 2040, it outlines, you know, it's a very ambitious plan for the regions. And you know, particularly for me living here in Cork in the Munster area, I can see what's planned, and it, you know, it's very exciting times. I really do think the industry is, you know, is going to take off. You know, the governments here in the past, you know, when recessions came, they tended to ring in the rein in the purse and everything stopped. But I think they've learned from the mistakes now, and the plan is to continue to pour money into infrastructure. So yeah, I think it's the outlook is is very, very positive. The challenge is to be able to supply the workforce to deliver it.
Great. Daniel, your boldest prediction?
So I agree that the construction industry is of all industries that we follow, probably, and it's kind of almost strangely, I've never kind of said that before, the best position of any industry to take advantage of all of the infrastructure spending. Obviously, infrastructure means construction, so that's great. But the bold part that I would like to predict is that on the international side, a lot of what we have done locally, and obviously construction is the most local of industries, but the competition on new technologies is going to be international. That the not only the design, but the actual construction will be done by machines operated from wherever, even on site, with all the safety concerns and all that. I believe that the industry is going to be international.
Very good. Chris, final word for you.
I think it's to build an infrastructure in the UK that enable our grandchildren to take advantage of all the technologies, and to create a tax and incentive environment that allows UK companies to regain their position in the global infrastructure market. And opportunities there, but you've got to grasp an opportunity, and you've got to have the nerve to grasp it and the determination. And I think that's a really great opportunity for the UK.
3 wonderfully bold predictions there, gentlemen. Thank you so much. So let's leave it there. Sean Carraghey, Chris Phillips, Daniel Crosby, thank you so much for joining us today. Your inputs were very appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been A Bit of Business. My name is John FitzGerald. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, John.
Hey guys, see you lads.